The wind was more than just air moving. It was a living, breathing force that tugged at her coat and whipped her dark, untamed hair across her face. Dr. Alara Vance stood firmly in the middle of a vast, empty field, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. She didn't mind the mud or the cold. To her, this was not bad weather. This was a conversation. She looked up at the sky, not with fear, but with a deep, focused curiosity. The clouds were rolling in, thick and gray like mountains on the move. Most people saw chaos, a reason to stay indoors with a warm drink. Alara saw a beautiful, complex puzzle. Every rumble of thunder was a sentence, every flash of lightning a piece of punctuation in a story the sky was telling. Her life's work was to learn its language. "Leo, what's the reading now?" she called out, her voice steady against the growing roar of the wind. A young man with messy red hair and glasses, huddled inside their specially equipped van, shouted back. "Barometric pressure is dropping fast, Alara. Faster than the model predicted. This is wild." Leo was her intern, a tech wizard who could make a computer sing. He was brilliant, but he still got nervous when the storms got big. Alara was the calm at the center of it all. She walked back to the van, her movements sure and practiced. The van was her mobile laboratory, filled with screens, wires, and gadgets that measured everything from wind speed to the electrical charge in the air. It was her home away from home. "This is it, Leo," she said, a spark of excitement in her eyes. "This storm tempest is the one I've been waiting for. My calculations show it's going to develop into a supercell, a once-in-a-lifetime event right over the Scottish Highlands." Leo looked at the map on his screen. A swirling mass of red and yellow was heading right for the most remote, mountainous region. "Are you sure about this?" "It's the middle of nowhere. What if we get stuck?" "That's the point," Alara smiled. "No city lights, no interference. Just pure, raw data. We'll be able to understand storms better than anyone ever has. We can help give people more warning, save lives. This isn't just a storm chase, Leo, it's a mission." They packed the last of their equipment and got into the van. As they drove, the landscape changed. The gentle hills gave way to steep, rugged mountains. The sky grew darker, a deep, bruised purple. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, splatting loudly against the windshield. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. Alara watched her screens, calling out numbers, her mind working like a powerful computer. But then things started to get strange. Alara," Leo said, tapping frantically at his tablet. "The data stream is glitching. The wind shear is showing values that shouldn't be possible. It's like the storm is twisting in on itself." Alara leaned over, her brow furrowed. "It must be a sensor error. Reboot the system." Leo did, but the strange readings only got stronger. Then the van's radio crackled to life with a burst of static, followed by a high-pitched whine that made them both wince. "That's not normal," Leo whispered, his eyes wide behind his glasses. Just then, a brilliant fork of lightning lit up the sky, followed almost instantly by a crack of thunder so loud it felt like it shook the very bones of the earth. The van shuddered. "Okay, even I'm getting a little nervous now," Alara admitted, her scientific confidence wavering for just a second. She peered through the windshield, now being pounded by a wall of water. The wipers were on their highest setting, but they were useless. They were driving blind. "We need to pull over, Leo. This is too dangerous." But there was nowhere to pull over. They were on a narrow, winding road, with a steep rock face on one side and a dark, misty drop on the other. They had to keep moving, slowly, crawling forward into the heart of the chaos. Suddenly, a tremendous gust of wind hit the side of the van, pushing it sideways. Leo gripped the dashboard, his knuckles white. "Alara, I see it," she said, her hands tight on the steering wheel. She was fighting to keep the van on the road. In a break in the rain, she saw something up ahead, a light. A single golden glow in the overwhelming darkness. "Look, a house, or a castle?" They inched closer. It wasn't a castle, but it was a grand old manor house built from dark gray stone. It looked ancient and sturdy, with tall windows and a heavy wooden door. It stood like a silent guardian against the storm. "This is Glenmorrigan Manor," Alara said, reading a faded sign on a gatepost. "I remember it from the map. It's supposed to be empty, a historical site." Another blast of wind and a nearby tree branch cracked, falling onto the road just behind them with a sickening crash. "Empty or not, we need to ask for shelter," Leo said, his voice trembling. "We can't stay out here." Alara knew he was right. Her perfect data set would mean nothing if they didn't survive to analyze it. She guided the van through the open iron gates and up a long, winding driveway. the tires crunching on the wet gravel. They parked as close to the large front door as they could, grabbed their emergency bags, and ran through the pouring rain. By the time they reached the covered entrance, they were both soaked to the skin and shivering. Ilara lifted the heavy iron knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed ominously into the stormy night. For a moment, there was nothing but the howling wind. She was about to knock again when they heard the sound of a heavy bolt being drawn back. The large door creaked open, revealing an elderly man. He was tall and thin, dressed in an old-fashioned butler's suit. He held a single flickering candle that cast dancing shadows on his wrinkled, kind face. His eyes, however, were sharp and bright, and they looked at Ilara not with surprise, but with a strange sense of recognition. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm and deep, a complete contrast to the chaos outside. "We're so sorry to bother you," Ilara began, wiping rain from her eyes. "We're meteorologists caught in the storm. Our vehicle—" We couldn't go on. "Is there any chance we could wait here until it passes?" The old man, Mr. Abernathy, as he introduced himself, smiled a gentle, knowing smile. He opened the door wider, a warm, inviting light spilling out. "Of course," he said. "Glenmorgan has weathered many a strange storm. You are not the first to seek refuge here." He paused, his eyes lingering on Ilara. "In fact," he added, his tone hinting at a secret, "you are just in time. The ball is about to begin." The heavy oak door of Glenmorgan Manor closed behind them with a soft, solid thud, and the world outside seemed to vanish. The roar of the wind and the drumming of the rain became a distant, muffled whisper. Ilara and Leo stood dripping on a vast, intricate rug in a grand entrance hall, their mouths slightly agape. The air inside was still and warm, carrying the faint, sweet scent of old wood and beeswax. Mr. Abernathy took their wet coats, his movements slow and graceful. The candle in his hand threw flickering light across portraits of serious-looking people in old-fashioned clothes and onto a wide, wooden staircase that curved up into the shadows. "Thank you." "Mr. Abernathy," Ilara said, her voice echoing in the quiet space, "we truly appreciate this. We'll just stay here in the hall until the worst of it passes." Leo, shivering, nodded in agreement, his glasses still speckled with rain. Mr. Abernathy gave that same gentle, knowing smile. "Nonsense," he said softly. "You will catch your death of cold in this drafty hall. Besides, you are guests, and all guests are expected at the ball." Ilara and Leo exchanged a confused glance. A ball? In this remote, ancient house in the middle of a historic storm? It made no sense. Leo raised an eyebrow at Ilara, a silent question. "Is this guy okay?" "Perhaps there's a misunderstanding," Ilara began, trying to be polite. "We're just meteorologists. We're not dressed for a party, and we certainly weren't invited." "The storm is your invitation," Mr. Abernathy replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned and began to walk across the hall, expecting them to follow. "It has a way of bringing the right people to Glenmorgan on nights like this. Now come, you cannot attend in your traveling clothes." Hesitantly, Ilara and Leo followed him. He led them not up the main staircase, but down a dimly lit corridor to a smaller, cozy room lined with books. A fire crackled warmly in the hearth. Laid out on 2 chairs were 2 sets of clothing. For Leo, there was a simple but elegant suit of dark wool that looked like it would fit him perfectly. For Ilara, there was a gown of a deep, stormy gray-blue, soft and flowing. "Please change into these," Mr. Abernathy said. "I will return shortly." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. The moment he was gone, Leo whirled around to face Ilara. "Okay, what is going on?" he whispered, his voice tight with anxiety. "A butler? A ball? Suits and gowns just lying around? This is seriously weird, Ilara. This feels like the start of a horror movie." Ilara walked over to the gown, running her fingers over the fabric. It was incredibly soft. "It's odd, I'll give you that," she admitted. Her scientific mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it's a historical reenactment group staying here, or a very eccentric family tradition. He seems harmless, Leo, and we are his guests. The least we can do is be polite. "Polite is one thing," Leo muttered, picking up the suit. "Putting on strange clothes in a creepy old house is another." But they were cold and wet, and the dry clothes were tempting. Reluctantly, they changed. To their astonishment, the garments fit as if they had been tailor-made for them. Ilara looked at her reflection in a dark window pane. The gown was beautiful, making her feel strangely elegant and out of place at the same time. Leo straightened his jacket, looking uncomfortable but admittedly quite dapper. Just then, Mr. Abernathy returned. In his hands, he held two masks. One for Leo was simple and black. The other for Ilara was exquisite, made of a silvery material. It was shaped like swirling winds and delicate frost patterns. "The final touch," the old man said, handing them the masks. As Ilara's fingers touched the cool silver of her mask, a faint tingling sensation ran up her arm, like a tiny, harmless static shock. She dismissed it. They followed Mr. Abernathy back into the main hall and towards a pair of enormous, ornately carved doors. From behind them, Ilara could now hear it clearly, the soft, distant sound of music. A violin, maybe a cello. It was a slow, haunting melody that seemed to weave through the very air. Leo grabbed her arm. "Do you hear that?" he whispered, his eyes wide. "Where is that coming from?" The place was silent 2 minutes ago. Ilara's heart began to beat a little faster. This was defying all logic. "I don't know," she breathed. "But we're about to find out." Mr. Abernathy pushed the great doors open. The sight that met their eyes made all the breath leave Ilara's body. They were standing at the entrance to a magnificent ballroom. It was nothing like the dark, dusty hall they had imagined. The room was vast, with a high painted ceiling depicting scenes of clouds and stars. 3 gigantic crystal chandeliers hung from above, their 1,000 candles casting a warm golden light that made everything sparkle. The room was filled with people, dozens and dozens of men and women, all dressed in the most beautiful old-fashioned costumes. The women wore gowns of silk and satin and jewel tones, their skirts swishing as they moved. The men were in crisp, formal wear, and everyone, without exception, wore a mask. Some were simple, others were elaborate creations of feathers, gold, and porcelain hiding the faces beneath. They were all dancing, not a wild modern dance, but a formal, graceful waltz. They moved together in perfect time to the music, played by a small orchestra on a balcony at the far end of the room. The air was thick with the scent of blooming night flowers and the faint, clean smell of a coming rain. It was breathtaking. It was impossible. Leo stood frozen beside her, his jaw practically on the floor. This can't be real," he stammered. "Are we dreaming? Did we hit our heads in the storm?" Ilara couldn't answer. Her brain, her trusted tool of reason and analysis, had short-circuited. There was no scientific model, no data set, no logical explanation for this. A fully populated, lit, and lively ball in a remote manor that was supposed to be empty, in the middle of the worst storm she had ever seen. She looked at the dancers. They moved with an unearthly grace, their masks making them all anonymous, part of a single, beautiful, swirling pattern. For the first time in a very long time, Dr. Ilara Vance, a woman who trusted only what she could measure and prove, was completely and utterly lost. She was standing inside a miracle, and she had no idea what to do. The noise of the ballroom, the music, the laughter, the soft rustle of silk, felt like a physical wave washing over Ilara. It was so bright, so alive, so completely at odds with the violent storm she knew was raging just outside the stone walls. She stood frozen in the doorway, her silver mask feeling strangely cool and comforting against her skin. Leo was the first to find his voice, though it came out as a nervous whisper. "Okay, this is officially the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me," he said, his eyes darting from one masked face to another. "Where did all these people come from? How is there a full-blown party happening right now? This isn't just odd, Ilara, this is impossible." Ilara finally managed to tear her gaze from the swirling dancers to look at her friend. She saw the genuine fear in his eyes. Leo lived in a world of code and logic, where everything had an explanation. This had none. "I know," she said softly, trying to sound calm even though her own heart was hammering against her ribs. "But look at them, Leo, they don't seem dangerous. They just seem happy," and it was true. The masked guests waltzed with a lightness and joy that felt infectious. Their laughter wasn't loud or mocking, but gentle and melodic, like the tinkling of wind chimes. An elderly couple dressed in clothes from a century ago glided past them, smiling warmly from behind their simple masks, as if having 2 soaking wet scientists appear at their ball was the most normal thing in the world. Mr. Abernathy gently guided them further into the room. "Please," he said, "feel free to enjoy the festivities. The music, the refreshments, it is all for you. For us?" Ilara asked, bewildered. "For all who are meant to be here," he corrected himself with a slight bow before melting back into the crowd, leaving them alone on the edge of the dance floor. For a few minutes, They just stood and watched, two silent observers in a sea of movement. Leo kept fidgeting with his suit jacket, looking completely out of place. Ilara, however, felt a strange shift inside her. The initial shock was slowly being replaced by a powerful curiosity. This was a mystery, and her entire life was built on solving mysteries. She noticed small details that made the situation even more puzzling. The candles in the massive chandeliers didn't flicker or drip wax. The flowers woven into the women's hair looked dewy and fresh, as if they had just been picked. And the air itself had a unique quality. It felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike, but also sweet and clean. "Look at their feet," Leo whispered, nudging her. Ilara looked down. The dancers' feet moved across the polished floor with an impossible grace. They seemed to glide, their steps so light and synchronized it was as if they were floating. "This is getting creepier by the minute," Leo insisted. "I think we should go back to the van. I'd rather take my chances with the storm." "And do what, Leo?" Ilara asked, her eyes still fixed on the dancers. "Sit in the cold and dark while this is happening a few feet away. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Maybe we're not supposed to understand it. Maybe we're just supposed to experience it." Just then, the music from the orchestra swelled and a new song began. It was a different melody, slower and more profound. It seemed to pull at something deep within Ilara's chest. As the dancers rearranged themselves, a path cleared through the middle of the ballroom. And that's when she saw him. He was standing on the other side of the floor, tall and still amidst the movement. His mask was a deep, midnight blue, intricately etched with patterns that looked like forked lightning. He wore a dark, elegant jacket that seemed to shift in the light, sometimes appearing black, sometimes a deep, stormy gray. But it was his presence that commanded attention. He wasn't just watching the ball. He felt like the center of it, the calm, still point around which everything else revolved, and he was looking directly at her. Ilara felt a jolt, a sensation so strong it was almost physical. It wasn't fear. It was a powerful, magnetic pull. His gaze, even from across the room and through the mask, was intense and focused solely on her. Leo noticed. "Whoa, who is that guy?" Ilara couldn't answer. She couldn't look away. Slowly, the man in the lightning mask began to walk towards her. The crowd of dancers seemed to part for him effortlessly, like water flowing around a stone. A hush fell over those nearby, their conversations fading into respectful silence as he passed. Ilara's scientific mind, usually so loud and analytical, had gone completely quiet. All she could hear was the beating of her own heart and the slow, haunting melody of the music. Her palms felt slightly damp, and she nervously smoothed down the fabric of her gray-blue gown. He stopped a few feet in front of her. He was taller than she had realized. He didn't speak. Instead, he gave a slight formal bow, and then, with a quiet grace, he held out his hand to her. It was an invitation, a question. Every logical part of her screamed that this was insane. To dance with a complete stranger? A masked man in an impossible ballroom? It went against everything she was. But another part of her, a part she had buried under charts and data for years, stirred awake. It was the part that loved the raw beauty of a thundercloud, not just its data points. It was the part that longed for connection, not just observation. Leo grabbed her elbow. "Ilara, you're not actually thinking about it, are you?" He hissed. She looked from Leo's worried face to the stranger's outstretched hand. It was a choice between the world she knew and this magical, unknown one standing right in front of her. Taking a deep breath, she made her decision. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, and a new kind of shockwave went through her, not of static but of warmth. His hand was strong and sure. As he led her onto the dance floor, the rest of the world, Leo, Mr. Abernathy, the storm, even her own doubts, simply faded away. There was only the music, the movement, and the mysterious man whose mask hid everything, but whose hand felt like it was exactly where it was meant to be. The moment Ilara's hand settled into his, the last whispers of the real world vanished. The grand ballroom, the masked faces, the music, it all blurred into a beautiful swirling backdrop. The only thing that felt sharp and real was the man standing before her. He placed his other hand gently on the back of her waist, a respectful and firm touch. She, following some instinct she didn't know she possessed, rested her free hand on his shoulder. For a terrifying second, she thought, "I don't know how to do this. I'll step on his feet. I'll look foolish." But as he began to move, leading her into the flow of the waltz, her fears melted away. Her body seemed to understand the steps her mind did not. It was as if the music was a current, and he was guiding her through it. They moved together, a perfect synchronization that felt less like dancing and more like flying. They didn't speak. Words felt unnecessary, even clumsy. Their conversation was in the movement. A slight pressure from his hand told her to turn. A shift in his weight signaled a change in direction. She followed effortlessly, her storm gray gown flowing around her legs. She, who was always leading, always in control of her research and her life, found a profound peace in letting someone else lead for once. She dared to look up at his mask. This close, she could see the incredible detail. The lightning bolts weren't just painted on. They were carved into the material, looking less like a design and more like a map of a real captured storm. Through the eye holes, she could see his eyes. They were a startling clear gray, the color of a rain-washed sky. And in them, she saw an intensity that matched the storm outside, but also a deep, ancient sadness that made her heart ache with a strange sympathy. He was looking at her with the same focused curiosity she usually reserved for her weather instruments. It was as if he was studying her, learning the rhythm of her breath, the slight part of her lips in concentration. It should have felt uncomfortable, but it didn't. It felt seen. For the first time, someone wasn't looking at Dr. Alara Vance, the brilliant scientist. He was just looking at Alara. As they spun, the ballroom itself seemed to respond to their dance. The candlelight in the chandeliers brightened, casting their twin shadows long and graceful across the floor. The music from the orchestra swelled, the violins crying out with a passion that mirrored the wild beating in her chest. She noticed that the other dancers were giving them a wide berth, watching them with soft, approving smiles, as if they were the guests of honor at this magical event, lost in the moment. Ilara forgot about Leo, about the van, about her life's work waiting outside in the storm. The constant humming noise of her own thoughts, the calculations, the worries, the plans, finally went silent. There was only the music, the movement, and the mesmerizing gray of his eyes. He spun her out, her arm extending, and then pulled her back in, closer than before. For a single, breathless moment, she was pressed against his chest, and she could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart. It was a powerful, rhythmic pulse, and to her astonishment, it seemed to sync with a deep, low rumble of thunder from outside. The sound wasn't frightening now. It felt like an accompaniment. When he loosened his hold and she was back at a proper dancing distance, she found she was breathing heavily, not from exertion, but from pure, overwhelming emotion. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, one she didn't have to think about or force. It was a smile of pure, uncomplicated joy. He saw it, and for the first time she saw a change in his eyes. The deep sadness didn't vanish, but it was joined by a spark of light, a glimmer of warmth, as if her smile had lit a small candle inside him. He gave her hand a gentle, almost imperceptible squeeze. It was in that moment that Alara understood something fundamental. This wasn't a random, strange event. This was a meeting. It felt as inevitable as the tide being pulled by the moon, as destined as a lightning strike finding its path to the earth. All the strange data, the impossible storm, the guidance to this manor, it hadn't been an accident. It had been a path leading her here, to this dance, to this man. The song began to draw to a close, the notes slowing, becoming softer and more tender. Their movement slowed with it, until they were barely swaying, still holding each other in the middle of the floor. The spell was too powerful to break. As the final note hung in the air and faded away, he dipped his head in a slow, graceful bow, never breaking eye contact. Ilara, her heart still pounding, gave a slight, instinctive curtsy. The spell was broken by the sound of polite applause from the other dancers. The normal sounds of the ballroom rushed back in. Ilara blinked, suddenly aware of the crowd around them again. She looked over to the doorway where she had left Leo, and saw him still standing there, his arms crossed, his black mask pushed up on his forehead, and a look of deep concern on his face. She felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by the lingering feeling of the dance. She turned back to the masked man, 1,000 questions now bubbling up inside her. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man in the lightning mask simply looked at her, his gray eyes holding a universe of unspoken stories. He brought her hand to his lips and brushed a kiss across her knuckles. It was not a romantic gesture, but one of deep respect and gratitude. Then, without a word, he released her hand, turned, and began to walk away, the crowd parting for him once more. Elara stood alone in the center of the ballroom, the ghost of his touch still warm on her skin, the memory of the dance etched into her very soul. The chase for the perfect storm was no longer about data. It had just become deeply, undeniably personal. The masked man was walking away, and a sudden, sharp panic gripped Elara. It felt like a part of her was being physically torn away. She couldn't let him just disappear into the crowd. Not after what had just happened. Wait, she called out, her voice stronger than she expected. He stopped. He turned back to look at her, his gray eyes questioning from behind the lightning-streaked mask. He didn't speak, but simply tilted his head, waiting. Elara hurried to his side, her heart still thrumming from the dance. "Please," she said, her voice dropping to a more private level. "Don't go, I have so many questions." He studied her face for a long moment, as if weighing a difficult decision. Then he gave a single slow nod. He gestured with his hand, not towards the crowded dance floor, but towards a pair of large glass doors that led out to a balcony. It was an invitation to speak in private. Elara nodded quickly, a wave of relief washing over her. She glanced back at Leo, who was now talking animatedly with Mr. Abernathy, his hands waving in clear frustration. She felt another twinge of guilt, but the pull to follow the stranger was too strong. She would explain it to Leo later. She followed the man out onto the balcony. The moment she stepped through the doors, the warm, flowery air of the ballroom was replaced by the wild, wet chill of the storm. The wind tugged at her gown and whipped loose strands of her hair across her silver mask. It should have been uncomfortable, but to Elara, it felt like coming home. The balcony was a wide stone platform overlooking the dark, tumultuous valley. The storm was directly above them now, a living, breathing monster of cloud and energy. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the landscape in sudden, shocking bursts of white light. The thunder that followed was immediate and immense, a deep roar that vibrated in her chest. The man stood at the stone railing, his back to her, looking out at the chaos as if it were a familiar friend. He seemed taller here, more powerful, his silhouette outlined against the flashing sky. Elara came to stand beside him, the stone railing cool under her palms. "It's incredible," she whispered, her scientist's mind re-engaging despite the magic of the evening. "I've never seen a storm with this much energy. The convection currents must be... the electrical charge is..." Her words trailed off. She was trying to use her old language to describe something that felt entirely new. The man turned his head to look at her. He slowly reached up, and for the first time he spoke. His voice was not what she expected. It wasn't loud or commanding. It was low and resonant, like the distant rumble of thunder before it grows close. "You see the math," he said, his voice carrying a hint of a sad smile. "The numbers, the patterns." Elara was taken aback. "Well, yes, that's what it is. It's a physical phenomenon." He shook his head slowly and turned fully to face the storm again, raising a hand towards the sky. "Look again. Look with more than your eyes." He moved his hand in a slow, graceful arc, as if conducting the orchestra inside. And as he did, something impossible happened. The chaotic clouds above them seemed to respond. A particularly violent swirl of dark cloud began to smooth out, its movements becoming more rhythmic, more like a dance. The lightning, which had been flashing randomly, began to pulse in time with the music still drifting from the ballroom. Elara gasped, her hands gripping the railing until her knuckles turned white. "How are you doing that?" "I am not doing it," he said softly, his eyes fixed on the storm. "I am listening to it. This is not a phenomenon. This is a feeling. This is loneliness that has lasted for centuries." His words settled over her, heavy and unbelievable. And yet, looking at the storm now, she began to see it. The wild, untamed fury. It didn't feel angry. It felt lost. It felt desperate. The thunder wasn't a roar of rage, but a cry for someone to understand. Her scientific mind, which had been fighting for control, finally surrendered. The strange data, the impossible ball, the way he moved, it all clicked into a terrifying, wonderful, impossible truth. "You," she breathed, the realization dawning on her like the sunrise. "It's you. The storm. It's a part of you." He lowered his hand and turned to face her, the lightning in the sky reflected in his gray eyes, making them flash with an inner light. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He simply looked at her, and in his gaze she saw the truth. She saw the vast empty skies, the long, Solitary journeys over mountains and seas. The endless cycle of building power and releasing it. Alone. You're the tempest, she whispered, the name feeling both strange and right on her tongue. I have been called that, he acknowledged, his voice a low murmur. I am the heart of this storm. And this ball, it is my one night. My one chance every 100 years to not be alone, to feel a connection, to dance with someone who is not afraid to step into the rain. The sadness in his eyes was now a physical weight in the air. Ilara understood everything. The manor wasn't just a shelter from the storm. It was the storm's refuge. The guests weren't random people. They were a magical echo, a creation of his profound loneliness, a party thrown for one. And she had been invited. The wind whipped around them, but Ilara didn't feel cold anymore. She felt a burning compassion, a connection so deep it stole her breath. This powerful ancient being was showing her his most vulnerable self. He looked from her face out to the raging night, and then back to her. The music from the ballroom softened, becoming a tender, hopeful melody. And you, Ilara, he said, her name sounding like a secret on his lips. You did not run from the storm. You chased it. You are the first who has ever truly seen me. In that moment, standing on the balcony between a magical ball and a sentient storm, Ilara Vance was no longer just a scientist. She was a woman who had found a mystery more beautiful than any she could have ever imagined. And she knew with a certainty that shook her to her core that her life would never be the same again. The truth hung in the air between them, as charged and real as the lightning splitting the sky. The Tempest King, he wasn't just a man. He was the storm. The very phenomenon she had dedicated her life to studying was standing beside her, his heart beating in time with the thunder. Ilara's mind, usually a whirlwind of calculations and theories, was perfectly, peacefully still. There was no room for doubt or analysis. She simply knew he was telling the truth. She could feel it in the air, in the way the wind gently touched her hair, in the deep ancient sadness in his gray eyes. Every 100 years, she finally whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustling of her gown in the wind. The thought was too lonely to fully grasp. He nodded, turning his gaze back to the violent, beautiful chaos he commanded. The world needs the rain, the wind, the lightning, but it does not need me. So I wander, I sleep, and on this one night I allow myself this memory of connection. He gestured slightly towards the glowing ballroom behind them, a dream of company. Ilara's heart ached for him. She thought of her own life, of long nights in her lab with only her screens for company. She was surrounded by people at the university, but she often felt just as isolated, buried in her data. She understood loneliness. But a century of it? The idea was unbearable. But why me? She asked, the question tumbling out. I'm just a scientist. I came here to put your storm into a computer. A faint, genuine smile touched his lips, the first she had seen. It transformed his face, making the sadness in his eyes momentarily retreat. You are not just anything, Ilara. You chase the storm not to conquer it, but to understand it. You look at the chaos and see a pattern, a beauty. You respect it. That is a rare thing. The storm, I felt your respect. It called to you. He took a step closer to her. The space between them felt electric. The others who have come here over the centuries, he continued, his voice low. They saw a party, a strange dream. They enjoyed the dance and forgot by morning. But you see me? You asked my name. Ilara looked from his intense, hopeful face back to the storm. She saw it with new eyes now. She didn't just see a supercell with a powerful updraft. She saw his spirit, wild, free, and profoundly lonely. The thunder was his heartbeat. The lightning was his fleeting moments of joy. The rain was his tears. It must be so quiet, she said softly, not looking at him. In the spaces between the thunder. So quiet. Her words seemed to startle him. His breath caught. It was a small observation, but it struck a deep chord. No one had ever thought about the silence for the storm itself. Yes, he breathed out, the word filled with emotion. It is. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the symphony of the wind and the distant waltz from the ballroom. It was a strange and beautiful duet. Ilara felt a connection to him so strong it was like a physical rope pulling her closer. She had spent her life looking up at the sky, and now the sky had come down to meet her. What happens when the night ends? She asked, almost afraid of the answer. The dream fades, he said, his smile fading. The guests vanish. The manor sleeps. And I must go back to the sky. Back to the silence. The finality in his voice sent a jolt of panic through her. The thought of him vanishing, of this magical night ending and him returning to a century of solitude, felt like a wrongness in the world. She couldn't let it happen. She wouldn't. "There has to be another way," she said, her voice firm now. She turned to face him fully, her scientist's mind waking up but with a new purpose. It wasn't about studying him anymore. It was about helping him. "You don't have to be alone. What if you didn't have to wait 100 years? What if you could stay?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a painful hope. "This form, this connection, it is only possible here at the heart of my power. For this one night, to exist in your world, it would require an anchor. A tether to something real, something lasting, something I have never had." "An anchor?" Ilara asked, her mind racing. "What kind of anchor?" Before he could answer, a new sound cut through the storm, a voice sharp with worry and frustration. "Ilara." They both turned. Leo was standing in the balcony doorway, his face pale, his mask gone. He was staring at them, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Ilara, what are you doing out here?" he said, his voice tense. "You're talking to him? Who is he?" "We need to go. Now. The storm is getting worse. I think the van's antenna is gone. We're losing everything." He was pulling her back to her old world, a world of broken equipment and practical problems. But Ilara's world had just become infinitely larger and more magical. She looked from Leo's scared, familiar face to the Tempest King's hopeful, lonely one. She was standing on a precipice between two realities. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she could not go back to the person she was before. The chase was over. She had found what she was looking for, and it was so much more than just data. Leo's voice was like a splash of cold water. The magical bubble that had surrounded Ilara and the Tempest King popped. The sounds of the storm rushed back in, louder and more aggressive than before. Ilara turned, her heart sinking. Leo stood in the doorway, drenched and shivering. He wasn't just worried. He was terrified. He saw his mentor and friend standing on a storm-lashed balcony with a masked stranger, looking as if she belonged there. "Leo," Ilara said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's okay. Just give me a moment." "A moment?" Leo's voice cracked. "Ilara, look around. This isn't one of your experiments. This place, it's not right. The people in there, I tried to talk to them. They just smile and nod and say nothing real. And him?" He pointed a shaky finger at the Tempest King. "Who is he?" The Tempest King did not react with anger. He simply watched Leo with a look of deep understanding, as if he was used to this fear. He took a slow step back, giving Ilara space. This was her world, her friend. He would not interfere. Ilara walked towards Leo, her movements calm despite the storm inside her. "Leo, listen to me. I know this is hard to believe. I know it doesn't make sense. But you have to trust me." "Trust you?" Leo's eyes were wide. "You're acting like you're under a spell. We're scientists, Ilara. We deal in facts. And the fact is we are trapped in a creepy old house with a bunch of people who don't seem entirely real. In the middle of a storm that's breaking all the laws of physics. We need to get to the van, try the radio, call for help." He was speaking her old language, the language of logic and safety. And a part of her, the part that had been Dr. Vance for so long, understood him completely. But the other part, the part that had just danced with a storm, knew that his logic was too small for what was happening here. "Leo, the facts have changed," she said, stopping in front of him. "The storm isn't breaking the laws of physics. It's something else, something more." She glanced back at the Tempest King. He stood patiently, the wind whipping his dark hair. He was the something more, and she knew she had to make a choice. She could follow Leo back to the van, back to a life of measuring mysteries without ever solving them. Or she could stay and step fully into the mystery itself. She thought about the Tempest King's words. An anchor, a tether to something real. She looked at Leo's frightened, loyal face. He was her friend. He was real. She took a deep breath, making her decision. "Leo," she said, her voice clear and strong against the wind. "I'm not leaving." Leo stared at her, disbelief washing over his face. "What, Ilara, you can't be serious." "I am," she said. "I've never been more serious in my life. This is why we came here. Not for data. This is the reason. I can't explain it to you in a way that will make sense, but I am asking you as my friend to trust me. Go to the van, be safe. Wait for the storm to pass. And what will you be doing? Leo asked, his voice thick with hurt and confusion. I'll be here, she said, turning to look at the Tempest King. I'm going to try and help him. Help him? Help him with what? Who is he? Elara looked back at Leo, her eyes filled with a certainty that finally silenced him. He is the storm, Leo, and he's been alone for far too long. Leo opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He just looked at her, at the stranger on the balcony, and then back at her. He saw the change in her. This wasn't the driven, focused scientist he knew. This was a woman who had found something she wasn't even looking for. He slowly shook his head, a deep sadness in his eyes. Okay, he whispered, the fight going out of him. Okay, Elara, but please be careful. He gave the Tempest King one last, wary look, then turned and disappeared back into the ballroom, heading for the main hall and the front door. A heavy sadness settled on Elara. She had hurt her friend, but she knew it was a necessary pain. Some paths you have to walk alone. She walked back to the railing where the Tempest King was waiting. You sent your friend away, he said softly. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. I did, Elara replied, her voice steady. He belongs to one world, and I feel like I'm standing in another. She looked up at him, her gaze direct. You said you need an anchor, a tether to something real. Tell me what that means. What can I do? The Tempest King looked down at her, his gray eyes swirling with emotion, hope, fear, and overwhelming gratitude. An anchor is a choice, Elara, he explained, his voice a low rumble. A conscious, willing decision to form a bond. It is a promise. If you choose to be my anchor, a part of you would always be with me, and a part of me would always be with you. It would tie my spirit not just to the sky, but to a single beating heart. It would allow me to exist in some form in your world, beyond this night. He reached out his hand, palm up, towards her. It was not a command, but an offering. But it is not a small thing, he warned, his eyes serious. It is a sharing of souls. You would feel my loneliness in your quiet moments. I would feel your joys and your sorrows. We would be connected forever. You would have to want this with your whole heart. Elara looked at his outstretched hand. She thought of her life of quiet routines and loud storms. She thought of the empty spaces in her own heart that she had filled with work. She looked into his eyes and saw not a monster, not a god, but a person. A lonely, ancient person who had just offered her his entire existence. She didn't need to think anymore. Her heart had already decided. Without a word, she placed her hand in his. A feeling of immense peace mixed with a thrilling surge of power flowed through her. It was not scary. It was like coming home after a very long journey. I want this, she said, her voice clear and sure. I choose to be your anchor. And in that moment, under the stormy sky, the scientist and the storm became one. The moment Elara's hand met his, the world changed. It was not a loud or violent change. It was a deep, quiet shift, like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place. A warm energy flowed from his hand into hers, traveling up her arm and spreading through her entire body. It didn't hurt. It felt like remembering something she had forgotten long ago. She gasped, not in pain, but in wonder. She could feel it, a second heartbeat, strong and steady, beating alongside her own. Thump, 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 thump. It was the rhythm of the storm, the pulse of the earth, the very beat of his life, now intertwined with hers. She looked at their joined hands, and for a second she thought she saw a soft, silver light passing between their fingers. But the change inside her was the most profound. She suddenly felt more. The air was no longer just air. She could feel every drop of moisture in it, every gentle push of the wind. The distant rumble of thunder was no longer just a sound. It was a feeling in her bones, a deep and powerful voice speaking a language she now understood. She looked up at the Tempest King. He was watching her, his gray eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. Elara, he whispered, his voice tight with emotion. Are you all right? A slow, radiant smile spread across Elara's face. I can feel it, she breathed out. I can feel the rain gathering in the clouds to the west. I can feel the wind dancing over the hills. She looked directly into his eyes. I can feel you. At her words, the fear in his eyes melted away, replaced by a joy so pure it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. For the first time, he wasn't the lonely king of the storm. He was just a man looking at the woman who had chosen to share his world. The world around them began to respond to this new connection. The wild, angry storm that had been raging above the manor began to calm. The wind softened from a scream to a sigh. The frantic, jagged lightning was replaced by softer, broader flashes that lit up the sky with a gentle glow. The rain didn't stop, but it became a steady, peaceful shower, washing the world clean. It was as if the storm itself was letting out a long, slow breath of relief. Inside the ballroom, the music swelled into a triumphant, joyful melody. The masked guests, who had been watching with bated breath, now smiled and resumed their dancing, their movements even more graceful and light than before. It was a celebration. Alara laughed, a sound of pure, unburdened happiness. She let go of his hand and spun in a slow circle, her arms outstretched, feeling the changed air on her skin. "It's so beautiful," she whispered. "I spent my whole life looking at it from the outside, but I never knew it felt like this from the inside." He watched her, his own heart so full he thought it might burst. For centuries he had only known solitude. Now he was experiencing the miracle of being understood, of being felt. "You are not just my anchor, Alara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are my calm. You are the quiet eye at the center of my storm." He stepped forward and slowly he reached up and untied the strings of his lightning-streaked mask. He let it fall away, revealing his face fully for the first time. He was handsome, with strong features and lines around his eyes that spoke of ages of watching the world. But his eyes were the same, clear, kind, and full of the power of the sky. He was no longer a mysterious stranger. He was real. Alara, feeling a surge of courage, reached up and untied her own silver mask. She let it drop, wanting him to see her, all of her, without any barriers. The scientist. The woman. The person who had chosen him. They stood there face to face, no longer a meteorologist and a myth, but simply Alara, and the man whose heart now beat in time with hers. The storm was not gone. It was still there, a powerful, natural force, but its destructive anger had passed. It had been soothed by the one thing it had always lacked: connection. He offered her his hand again, not to forge a bond this time, but to continue their dance. "May I?" he asked, his eyes shining. Alara placed her hand in his, her smile answering for her. "Yes." And as they began to move, a slow, gentle waltz there on the balcony in the soft rain, Alara knew that her life had split into two parts: the time before this moment, and the time after. She had found her great discovery. It wasn't a set of data or a perfect storm. It was a heart, and it was a home, and it was beating right alongside her own. The greatest mystery wasn't in the sky anymore. It was right here, in the simple, magical act of holding his hand. They danced on the balcony until the rain became a gentle mist and the first hint of pale gray light touched the eastern horizon. There were no more words between them. They didn't need them. The connection they shared was a conversation all its own. Alara could feel his wonder at her presence, a steady, warm hum alongside the new rhythm in her chest. He could feel her quiet acceptance, a peaceful shore for his once restless sea. But as the sky began to lighten, a change also began in the air around them. The music from the ballroom, which had been so vibrant and real, started to sound distant, like a radio station slowly losing its signal. The laughter of the guests became softer, more like an echo. Alara felt a pang of anxiety, a flutter that was both hers and his. She looked towards the ballroom doors. The change was subtle at first. The colors of the women's gowns seemed less bright, as if fading in the sun. The flames on the candles in the great chandeliers no longer cast sharp shadows, but a soft general glow. One of the masked gentlemen, raising a glass to toast, seemed to become slightly transparent for a second, and Alara could see the outline of a bookshelf right through his arm. "It's ending, isn't it?" she whispered, her hand tightening in his. He nodded, a deep sadness returning to his beautiful gray eyes. "The night is over. The magic of the ball cannot hold in the daylight. It was only ever a dream." "But it wasn't a dream," Alara said fiercely, turning to face him. "It was real. This is real." She placed her hand over her heart, where she could still feel the steady, powerful beat of his life intertwined with her own. He gave her a sad, loving smile. "That part is real, Alara. That will not fade. But this place, this moment, it must." As he spoke, the world around them began to dissolve more quickly. The grand ballroom, with its music and dancing, shimmered like a mirage. The guests one by one bowed gracefully to them and then faded away into specks of light, like fireflies winking out. The sound of the orchestra melted into the morning sounds of waking birds and the drip of rainwater from the roof. Ilara watched, her heart aching with a sweet sorrow. It was like watching a beautiful painting being washed away by the rain. Mr. Abernathy was the last to remain. He walked out onto the balcony, looking not at all surprised by the vanishing world. He looked the same as he had last night, solid, real. He bowed deeply to the Tempest King, and then to Ilara. "The anchor holds, my lord," the old man said, his voice full of respect. "The cycle is broken. You are free." Then he too turned and walked back into the manor. As he passed through the doorway, he seemed to step into a shadow and was gone. In a matter of moments, the vibrant ballroom was gone. They were now standing on a dusty stone balcony attached to a silent, empty hall. The room behind them was dark and filled with sheets covering old furniture. The only light came from the dawn breaking through the clouds outside. The magic had retreated, leaving behind the cold, hard truth of day. Ilara shivered, not from the cold, but from the sudden emptiness. She looked at the man beside her. He was still there, solid and real. But he looked different now, less like a king and more like a man who had lost his home. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small in the vast, quiet hall. "Now," he said, taking both of her hands in his, "I am untethered from this one night. Because of you, I am no longer bound to return to a century of solitude, but I am also no longer bound to this place." He looked out at the waking world. "I am free to walk in it. With you." The meaning of his words settled over her. He could come with her. He could leave this manor and be a part of her life. But a new worry, practical and human, crept into her mind. She thought of Leo waiting in the van. She thought of her job at the university, her apartment in the city, the world of traffic jams and grocery shopping and paying bills. How would the ancient spirit of the storm fit into that? How could she explain him? He felt her worry through their bond. It was a strange sensation, like a gentle tug on a shared thread. "I do not need to live in your house, Ilara," he said softly, understanding her completely. "My home is the sky. My body is the wind. But now, because of you, I have a heart that has a home. I can be with you when a summer breeze touches your face. I can be with you in the clean smell after a rain. I will be in every cloud you look at and every storm you watch from your window. And when you need me, truly need me, I will find a way to be by your side just like this." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes, but they were tears of relief and love. He wasn't asking her to give up her world. He was asking to become a part of it in his own way. "So this isn't goodbye?" she asked, a hopeful smile breaking through her tears. He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. His touch was warm and real. "Goodbye," he said, his own smile returning. "Ilara, we are bound. This is just the beginning." In the distance, down in the valley, she saw the morning sun break through the clouds, painting the wet landscape in gold. The storm was over. The perfect storm had not been destroyed. It had been transformed. It had been calmed by love. She knew that Leo would be waking up in the van, confused and worried. She knew she had a lot to explain, and a life to somehow put back together. But as she stood there, holding the hands of the man who was both a stranger and the other half of her soul, she felt no fear. She felt only a profound sense of peace. The greatest adventure of her life wasn't behind her. It was just beginning, and it was going to be beautiful. The morning sun was warm on Ilara's face as she walked down the gravel path away from Glenmorrigan Manor. The world was washed clean, smelling of wet earth and pine. Birds sang, and a gentle breeze, soft and friendly, played with the ends of her hair. It was the same place, but it felt entirely new. She saw their van parked exactly where they had left it. Leo was sitting on the bumper, a blanket around his shoulders, sipping from a thermos. He looked tired and worried. When he saw her, he stood up quickly, his face a mixture of relief and confusion. "Ilara, you're okay," he exclaimed, rushing towards her. He looked her up and down, still in the beautiful gray-blue gown, now looking out of place in the bright daylight. "What happened? I was so worried. I waited out here all night. The storm just stopped. It was the strangest thing." He looked past her towards the empty manor. "And him? The guy in the mask?" Ilara smiled, a calm, peaceful smile that seemed to confuse Leo even more. He's gone, Leo, but he's also not. She placed a hand over her heart. Leo stared at her, trying to understand. I don't get it. Was it all a dream? A hallucination from the storm pressure? It was more real than anything I've ever known, Ilara said softly. She looked up at the clear blue sky where only a few fluffy white clouds remained. I can't explain it in a way that will make scientific sense to you, but I need you to trust me. It was real, and it's over. She could see the struggle on his face. He wanted his old logical boss back. He wanted the world to make sense again. So what do we do now? He asked, his shoulders slumping. The project is ruined. All our equipment was fried by those energy pulses. We have no data. Ilara looked at the van, at their broken tools, and then back at the wide open sky. A thought, clear and certain, settled in her mind. The project was a success, Leo, she said, turning to him. We came to understand a storm. And we did. Just not in the way we planned. She walked to the van and opened the passenger door. Her ordinary clothes were still on the seat where she had left them. She changed quickly in the back of the van, the soft gown replaced by her familiar jeans and jacket. It felt like putting on an old skin that didn't quite fit anymore. As they got into the van, Leo in the driver's seat, he looked at her one more time. Are you sure you're okay? Ilara nodded, buckling her seatbelt. I'm better than okay, Leo, I promise. As they drove down the winding road, leaving the manor behind, Ilara felt a strange sensation. It wasn't sadness. It was a quiet, humming awareness. She could feel the sun on her skin, and she could feel his joy that she was warm. She could see the trees swaying in the breeze, and she could feel his playful spirit dancing through their leaves. She was not alone. Weeks passed. Life returned to its normal rhythm, but Ilara was different. She moved through her days with a new calmness. She still worked at the university. She still studied the weather, but her drive had changed. It was no longer about conquering the unknown. It was about appreciating its beauty. One afternoon, she was in her office, staring at a complex weather model on her screen. She was stuck, unable to see the pattern everyone else was missing. She leaned back in her chair, frustrated. Just then, a gust of wind blew through her open window, scattering the papers on her desk. She laughed, getting up to close it. As she did, her eyes fell on the newly arranged papers on the floor. They had fallen in a way that highlighted a data point she had completely overlooked. A small, subtle shift in atmospheric pressure over the Atlantic. It was the key. She looked out the window, at the wind that was now gently rustling the leaves of a tree. A deep sense of gratitude filled her. Thank you, she whispered. The leaves rustled a little louder in response. Another time, she was walking home on a difficult day, feeling stressed and overwhelmed. The sky was clear, but she felt a gray cloud hanging over her own heart. Suddenly, a warm, gentle rain began to fall from a single small cloud directly above her. It wasn't a storm, just a soft, cleansing shower that lasted just long enough to wash her worries away. The people on the street around her looked up, confused as they were in bright sunshine. But Ilara just smiled, lifting her face to the rain, knowing it was a gift just for her. She kept the silver mask. It sat on her bookshelf at home, a constant reminder that the world was far more magical than she had ever believed. Sometimes, when the moonlight hit it just right, it seemed to glow with a soft internal light. Leo noticed the change in her. He saw how her weather predictions became uncannily accurate. He saw the new peace in her eyes. He never fully understood what happened at Glenmorrigan Manor, but he saw that it had been good for her. Their friendship slowly mended, built on a new, unspoken respect. One evening, Ilara was sitting on her balcony, watching the stars come out. A feeling of perfect contentment settled over her. She closed her eyes and simply listened to the night, and in the quiet she felt him, not as a separate person, but as a presence woven into the fabric of her being. She felt his ancient strength, his boundless freedom, and his unwavering, eternal love for her. He was in the vast starry sky above, and he was in the quiet beat of her own heart. She had gone chasing a storm and had found a love as vast as the sky itself. Her life was no longer a solitary pursuit of knowledge. It was a duet. And as the first star of the evening twinkled brightly overhead, she knew without a doubt that their story was far from over. It was only just beginning. And it would be a beautiful, forever kind of story, written in the wind and the rain and the quiet spaces between heartbeats.